Well, first, congratulations to everyone. You made it. Last talk. Where's my mouse? There it is. Is that working? There we go. So last official talk, I want to take a quick recap of the things we've seen and learned. Does that work? Yay, okay. I want to give a few mentions to things that you haven't seen but you should be aware of, at least in my opinion. I'm also not going to be able to give you all of that, obviously, but I'm going to show you that. And this is broken, wait a second. And then I want to take a short sidestep, think about where we are and where we're going to go from here. So one of the things we have seen, a few things that we've seen are the Cumulus way of building parachains. If you have been to that workshop, we have seen the smart contracts. This way. We've seen how to do smart contracts in the future using Wasm, and we have seen how off-chain workers work, have we? This is doing something else on this. This is confusing. Yeah, it's confusing. I'm gonna go for this non-clicker version. Where the hell is going on? Let me refresh that. I don't know what's going on. It's weird. Great, TSL handshakes, yay. Sorry about that. Nah, it looks good. Still doesn't do it, what I wanted to do. Sorry about that. So now it seems to be in sync. And it's not loading pictures. Awesome. Look at it. Let's see how this works now. And we've seen off-chain workers and how they work. As mentioned before, I want to give also an honorable mention to other things you might have or might have not seen. You probably haven't seen here, but you should have some knowledge about. So the worst of this Substrate dev, Fred mentioned that in the very first talk, has been given a huge overhaul already and is a lot better. It's the starting point to do anything Substrate. But it's going to get another overhaul very soon, where we're going to go into much more background information. I want to give a shout out here to Sean, who you have seen in giving a talk and a workshop as well, and the entire DevX team who have been doing this great resource for all of us. Then you might have been aware that we have been participating in Oktoberfest again, and we've done it a little differently this time than compared to what we did in the years before. We took that opportunity to get our act together and make it easier to contribute to Substrate itself. With this very fast pace, it was always, thanks for the mention. You can't see the pictures, it's annoying. Let's see if it works now. I don't know, it used to work just fine. There we go, the pictures are there. I think it was because I restarted it. But I want to show you this one first. So there we go, nice. So we had Oktoberfest, coming back to my flow. And we've done that a little differently this time. We have taken that opportunity to get our act together, to clean up Substrate, to get a lot more issues in that have mentoring tags that are clearly described so that people can actually contribute to it. But we also took the opportunity to document a lot more ideas that we have that are floating around the company of things you could potentially already build with Substrate that we generally don't have the time to do or want to do in the soon or later future. And this is still open. Like if you go to Substrate Developer Hub, Oktoberfest, you can still find that. And I really recommend that you look at that if you're interested in building something on or with Substrate that we consider a really good experiment or useful. And there's people tagged in there that will help you do this. Another effort in the entire outreach and helping developers is also the Substrate seminars that Yoshi is giving every Tuesday now at 2 p.m. UTC. This is a Zoom call, weekly Zoom call, where they dive into some topic. You can suggest topics if you want, and it's everything from code walkthrough to discussing it to Q&A, anything. If you have questions, if you're stuck with something, I really recommend just jumping into the call, chatting with the other people, and getting Yoshi or other people to help you. So shout out to Yoshi for that. Another effort that has been going on and has not been noticed here yet is the Relay Chain blog podcast we're doing. You still have time to catch up. It's a 45-minute roughly once bi-weekly release cycle. Roughly, there's at least one recording around here happening at the moment, but it's 9 episodes in, so you can still catch up, which is just a blockchain about anything around Substrate and Polkadot. It goes into depth with interviews, but also just sheds light on different things. Shout out to Joe and Nicole. But also in the wider ecosystem, not only we are doing stuff, we've mentioned before Substrate is an ecosystem by now. One of the things that I would like to mention is the Rust and Blockchain newsletter that has been started, that we are perfect for, obviously. But there's also other projects and other things being mentioned there. And we learn about other things that happen also through this and other means, like the Substrate marketplace, which is already online. The blog Unison people were like, we want a searchable index of frame palettes, formerly SRML modules. And you can already submit yours. So if you have external modules and you want them to be discoverable, go to substratemarketplace.com and take a look at that. But then also code-wise, a lot has happened, and not all of that got mentioned here. Not only between Sub0.0 and now, but also in general, also around that time already. So there's BAPE, the new slot-based block authoring mechanism. There's a new way for you to define, if there are multiple forks, which one should be picked. It used to be just longest chain. You can now define that yourself, which is a select chain mechanism. We have a proof of work proving that pluggable consensus actually works. You can build your own consensus mechanism and use that. We have transaction weights, which is similar to gas, but quite different overall. A way of transaction payment management. We have signed extensions in the header information for you. We have made a lot of effort to get the random coin flip a lot more secure and random inside that. Another module that we even have a blog post about, but I don't think gets a lot of attention at the moment, is the EVM, which allows you to plug in and run Solidity contracts, which we have been asked about for forever. When are you going to do that? Then we launched it, and it was quiet. Weird. The peer set manager is a new economical model of how to manage peer networking overall. And child trees have been improved a lot, allowing you today to effectively plug in your own tribe mechanism, as long as it creates a proper Merkle root in the end, to be used inside the runtime. And you don't have to care that a consensus might need to know about this particular Merkle tree, because it doesn't, because it gets plugged in the regular consensus. So it allows you to do a lot more easy changes. And you notice here I could go on this, but there's one elephant in the room that needs addressing. The repo rename. It has been mentioned here a few times as well, and I'd like to shed some light on what happened there, why it happened, and what's going on in general. So for those who are not aware of it yet, lucky you, you're not a master, we've basically tried to split up the entire repository into 3 main parts. The client, which is everything that is the outer node infrastructure. If you're aware with the overall architecture diagram we often draw, this should feel familiar. Then we have frame, which is our inner chain functionality, and then we have the primitives, which is the interface layer between the two, effectively. And in there, I want to get some terms right. So if you think of that as, we have this one thing that is the outer system that goes like networking, consensus, management, and that kind of stuff, which is the inside the client, which is all now going to be prefixed with the SC in terms of crates. Then we have this fuzzy layer in between that the client is implementing these primitives. And these primitives are implemented from the other side using frame. I'm saying using frame here because frame is our current opinionated idea of what a chain runtime should look like. One of the reasons that we switched away from the terminology SRML is that pretending that this is the only possible Substrate runtime module library is not correct. We did this change preemptively, but also retrospectively. We know of consortium chains that run a Substrate using the client and the primitives, and they use nothing of what used to be the SRML to run a runtime. You could build any other runtime that implements the primitives, completely without using anything of the framework that you have. You can build a completely monolithic chain if you like. And inside this frame, we have a bunch of crates that are the basic that you need to have in order to run frame, which is support, system, utilities, and execution. And then we have a lot of other optional crates, which in reference to this crate idea we call pallets. And I'm very sorry for the pallets in between. We heard this is why we renamed it again, which caused more trouble for some. But I hope you understand now that it's good in the long run. It's painful now, I know, but it's useful in the long run. And one of the things why we did this and also cleaned this up and cleaned up our act on this is because we want them to be more independent. What we were able to do this and prove through this is that you can now, and you've seen one case earlier with the OSCoin people, what they did. They have a runtime that in the old style still uses some client stuff, but you can build this runtime and use that runtime and run it in something else that implements primitives. It doesn't actually have to be a Substrate client anymore. They are implementing it inside a test harness. And that works vice versa. So you can run frame on other systems than the Substrate client, but you can also use a Substrate client to run other systems than frame. And we hope this makes it also easier for more experimentation. One of the key reasons we did this was to be able to release it. You have been asking for it, and we have been talking about it a lot. We want to publish 2.0 on crates. This is the thing we want to do, right? One of the reasons we couldn't do that on 1.0 is we still have one GitHub dependency in there, and you cannot publish that on crates. The other thing was that because of the way that we allowed this structure to just play around by itself, we had circular dependencies, which you can also not publish. That is gone. With this model, we are enforcing strictly that client is not depending on frame, and frame is not depending on client. And primitives are not depending on either of them either. And that means we can also release them independently now, which is very, very exciting, because it allows for a more fluid release process. With publishing 2.0 on crates, we're also going to adhere to semantic versioning. Yay! That said, there's at least a few crates we already know are not going to be 2.0 in that sense, because we're not going to release them as 2.0. Namely, stuff around networking and consensus. That will be 0, 8, 9, we have to still discuss this. But we want to make clear that we believe they will change. And we will use them, and some other 2.0 crates will depend on them, but we potentially change them significantly in the future, because we just want to see them actually in practice. For almost any other things, we release them as at least 2.0, and from that point on, your build is not going to break anymore, if we do this right. I really hope we do this right, because we have a release manager now that is going to help us do this. We've already been doing the Kusama release management, and we are learning on the go. One of the things that we also agreed on doing is record changes you have to do in an upgrade, txt, dog, whatever, adog, md, that we're also going to keep up to date on master. So if you want to continue working on master, and it doesn't work anymore, the first thing you should do is look at that document and see the very first line. Have you applied what is said there yet? No, try that. And that will also make it possible to do minor and later major upgrades, hopefully a lot more seamlessly. This is a requirement for any breaking API change PR from 2.0 onwards. So we're not going to accept the PR unless they do document how you, as a user of this, will upgrade. And that brings me to the obvious question, does that mean it's stable? Well, it's complicated. As I showed you before, in the term of a blockchain that we release a blockchain framework for, what exactly do you mean by stable? Do you mean stable in terms of the API that you built on? Yeah, we adhere to Semver, so Cargo is going to figure out the best dependency tree for you. And we will make sure that this is kind of the case that you can run with. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's other changes that might happen that require other upgrades. We have these 3 base object components now that can be released independently. We have the question of, if we change certain stuff that is not actually changing your API, but changes the data structure underneath, we would potentially fork off an existing chain. That's not necessarily stable, though Semver-wise, it's still stable. So these kind of questions are stuff we haven't figured out yet. We don't even have the entire wording for it to figure out what we want to do. So I'm trying to get away around this question to the actual question you are asking, and that is, should we build on it? And that is a surrounding yes from my side. So first of all, we're building on it. We're building Kusama on 2.0. And we have no intention of breaking Kusama. So also all of these things that I talked about just now, we will have to figure them out eventually. We don't yet know. This is what I can tell you. But with 2.0 and not sticking on master, you do get all the yada yada that I was just talking about, like Semver, stability. And overall, we are building Kusama on it because we know you can build something like Kusama on it. 1.0 was a great release to show that you can do live upgrades on a testnet, but honestly, most people switched to master because they wanted off-chain workers. They wanted a lot of other features that were simply not in it, and we didn't backport. So this one will have them, so use that. As mentioned before, it has semantic versioning in the release notes. However, there's a lot of things that we also want to do, and you've seen some people already mention them and talk about them in what they think should be coming, that potentially break it. Potentially like what? So we talked about long-running off-chain workers. Sure, we want to make it possible to do them without having a Semver breaking change, but we might have to. We don't yet know what it looks like. We might have to do this. The same is true for on-chain data migration. We're currently doing that in Kusama, but we want to have a more general approach to this. What if you change the struct that you currently use in your runtime, and there's data on the chain? You want to migrate to that new one. We need to give some way to do this. It's currently not in there. We need to do this. Maybe this breaks it. Then we do really want to reduce the macro magic that is happening. But that might also mean we have to break some APIs. And then I mentioned before already, networking and consensus. These are not stable. These two are simply not stable, in our opinion. We're using them, and we're happy, and we observe them all the time, but we're also patching them all the time. So there's going to be some breaking changes. Does that mean there's going to be a 3.0? Maybe, potentially. When? We don't know. We're going to try to not break everything immediately, but, you know, it's ready when it's ready. So is this the future yet? Let's give it a quick reality check. What are we actually building here? We had that briefly mentioned by the Web3 Foundation earlier today. We're building the building blocks for Web3. When we look at the major updates of the web, whenever the web does a major update, everything that was possible before is still possible, right? But more. So in Web 1.0, we were able to publish and read in general. With Web 2.0, there was a stronger write feature in it. Specifically, it allowed everyone to write, not somebody who's just running a server, which allowed for higher level of collaboration and socializing on the net as well. Then the minor update of adding mobile access to this. When we want to upgrade this, we cannot only have this new trust. We still need to be able to bridge to this old world because people are used to this world. They're not going to give it up just because there's trust now. So when we talk about building the Web3, can we build something that is actually adding this new layer of trust, this transparency and ownership that we want to have, and governance on top of that, with the look and feel and what people need to do they used to do. We have recently done a hackathon project, Gather, which is a meetup.com replacement. And there's a blog post. It's not linked here, it's linked later. Effectively, what it did, it tried to create something that from the end user's perspective feels like meetup.com, but uses completely decentralized technologies, primarily Substrate. It is a global registry of groups and events, so yay, global registry, in a decentralized fashion. It has on-chain governance, so this is awesome. This is the new features that we have. But we also need to bridge to the 2.0 world, and we allowed there to be a really simple email password login system where we just use that to derive a key. So we don't have the feature that people can recover it if they forgot their password, but you could have this look and feel of email password. Similarly, we have an email auth flow. So via the JSON RPC, you could go to the node, you could give it the email address, it would send you an email, you would click on it to confirm the email, and they would be able to send you notifications via email, which is a common use case, right? And it would do that through off-chain workers. So an off-chain worker would notice, oh, in your group, you have seen there's a new event, so let me send you an email that there's a new event. This was all possible. The metadata itself was served through IPFS. You can read more about that in the blog post that I mentioned. By the way, the slides are all, I just tweeted them out earlier, so you can just look at that. But Gather still lacks a few things, in particular interoperability, so you still have to have your own account. That's an obvious one. Safe data storage. What I mean by that is, yes, the account can submit an IPFS link for the metadata or for the image, but there's no way to prove that it is that. There's no way to validate the data, because Substrate doesn't have a notion by itself of IPFS, right? So you could put in any garbage. You could put in cross-site scripting, which is, as you remember, the very beginning of 2.0, that was a really terrible thing that happened, cross-site scripting by users. And then there's data privacy. I didn't actually know that before somebody pointed that out, but meetup.com has like swinger clubs on it. And you might not want to have that knowledge that you are in a swinger club publicly known. Fair enough. Didn't think of that use case, but I completely see that. We can't really do that. Everything that is currently consensus relevant is something that the chain needs to know of. So what are we doing about this? Well, I mean, going through that from highest likelihood of happening to the least likelihood of happening. So not interoperability, that's obvious, there's Polkadot. This is going to happen with parachains, parathread, and XMCMP, which we just learned about earlier. Then there's also bridges, which was unfortunately not covered during Sub0 this time. There's the idea of having bridges between Substrate nodes, but also any other chain out there. And then there's Spree, which has been mentioned before as well, which is a trusted bridge in this context that we're talking about. But then you also need to interoperate with the rest of the world that is not chain right now, for which we have off-chain workers. Right? So we've shown that off-chain workers can be used already, but there's more things we want to look into. In particular, email and push notifications. Push notifications since 2.5 are a thing now. You need to be able to do that. And also external login mechanism. People still want to sign up with their Facebook. In regards to data storage, I'm leading a project internally which is called the large file storage approach, which is an extension to Substrate and Frame that should allow you to natively store and retrieve just with your node. So you don't have to do like another process anymore for IPFS or Dart or Scuttlebutt, but you would use this extension on your node to store data off-chain and have Substrate have a native understanding of that data. So there would be a type in your runtime that the off-chain worker understands to be data that it can fetch. In particular, the email example that I mentioned before with Gather, because the off-chain worker doesn't have any notion of what that string in there is, this hash of IPFS, when it sees a new Gather entry, it can send you an email that there's a new event, but it doesn't even know its name, because the metadata is stored off-chain and it's not something that Substrate currently has access to. And hopefully this would also allow you to piggyback that on your peer-to-peer network that you already have. We're still investigating multiple ways to do that, but one of the ideas is that you won't have to have a secondary network just for the data distribution, but you could manage that within your data, allowing, for example, also validation of that data. So if Substrate has a native understanding of, oh, what you're posting here is supposed to be a JSON, it can fetch that data and check that it's actually a JSON, and refuse to put it on chain if it's not. Third and most researchy part of our endeavors is around data privacy and security. So zero knowledge proofs are obviously something we're continuously looking at and are very interested in. We're not exactly sure where we go with this yet. We're definitely looking to maybe playing around with Zaxi or the new ZK rollup, ZK Sync, that has been launched just a day ago or yesterday or 2 days ago. We're very much interested in seeing other off-chain worker schemes, so off-chain worker just being out there. A multi-sig scheme is obviously something you might want to increase trust, or a threshold scheme where only once a certain majority of people have agreed that this value is on there is actually existing on-chain. But also in the lower layer, like just deeper in Substrate, talking about finally getting quick on spoilers. Getting quick on their on libp2p to make it completely agnostic to the rest of the network that you're actually doing a P2P network here, not an HTTP, is definitely something that will happen, in my opinion, next year, but who am I to tell? And then a project that we used to have in Ethereum, which is a secret store, is also something we do want to port over. The idea here is that you would have a node or a network of nodes that you would give private information to, and they would do a private calculation with it and then submit the result of that, rather than it being like the code and the data being on chain. And that obviously goes one step further, and we have seen that in the Lightning talks earlier today when we talk about trusted computing, either in a subset of nodes or even in hardware. But that is all going further than even next year, I think. But of course, there's many more things, and I want to bring that back to the hackathon Oktoberfest slide that I showed you earlier. There's a lot more ideas on here of things that people want to work on, and you might want to work on. And that brings it around to, the saying goes, like, the future is what you make of it, right? So it's not as much a question of what is Parity doing about it, but it's more like, what are you doing about it, all right? So, and with that, if you don't have anything better to say what you're going to do with the future, you should definitely sign up to the newsletter. And there's my details, and thank you very much. We
don't have time for questions, but
we don't have time for questions, but what's the best way for people to get in touch with you for questions?
Well, the details there.
Yes. Okay, cool. All right.
Otherwise, I'm going to be down here.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben.